The laugh came first, sharp and careless, cutting through the low hum of the cafe like a dropped glass shattering on tile. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it landed that way. When she slid her sleek black credit card across the table toward the broke single dad sitting across from her, she had no idea that in less than 24 hours, that same laugh would echo in her mind like a regret she could never fully silence. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a moment right now. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of human compassion, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. His name was Daniel Carter, and exhaustion clung to him the way winter clings to bare trees. It showed in the faint dark circles beneath his eyes, in the careful way he counted coins before ordering coffee, and in the way his shoulders stayed slightly hunched, as if bracing for another invisible blow. Daniel hadn't always been like this. Once, he'd had a steady job, a modest house filled with laughter, and a wife who believed tomorrow would always be better than today. Then life unraveled with cruel efficiency. An unexpected illness took his wife in less than a year. Medical bills swallowed his savings. Grief stole his focus, and missed shifts at work turned into termination letters. Suddenly, Daniel wasn't just a widower. He was a single father with a 5-year-old son named Oliver, standing on the edge of financial ruin, trying to look strong for a child who believed his father could fix anything. Across from him that afternoon sat Vanessa Whitmore, a woman whose life could not have been more different. Vanessa was successful, confident, and accustomed to rooms where people listened when she spoke. She worked in finance, wore tailored coats even on casual days, and carried herself with the assurance of someone who had never worried about whether her card would be declined. The meeting itself was accidental, born from a mutual acquaintance who thought Daniel needed networking, and Vanessa needed a reminder of life outside boardrooms. To Vanessa, it was an amusing distraction between meetings. To Daniel, it was another moment of quiet humiliation disguised as opportunity. As they sat together, the differences between them grew heavier with every passing minute. Vanessa talked about investments, travel, and risks that sounded exciting when failure wasn't fatal. Daniel nodded politely, offering little in return, because his world revolved around school lunches, overdue notices, and the constant mental math of survival. When the bill arrived, Daniel's stomach tightened. He already knew he couldn't afford even his portion without sacrificing something later that week. Vanessa noticed his hesitation, misread it entirely, and with a light, joking gesture slid her credit card toward him. It was meant as humor, a playful exaggeration of generosity, something she assumed he would laugh off, but Daniel didn't laugh. He felt the heat crawl up his neck, the familiar sting of shame pressing against his ribs. He pushed the card back gently, mumbling something about handling it himself, though he knew he couldn't. Vanessa laughed then, a short, dismissive sound, and waved the situation away. To her, the moment ended there. To Daniel, it carved itself deep into memory. That night, Daniel sat on the edge of his small apartment's bed, watching Oliver sleep. The boy clutched a worn stuffed dinosaur, blissfully unaware of eviction notices folded inside kitchen drawers. Daniel's phone buzzed with another reminder from the bank. Something inside him broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, dangerous way. He remembered Vanessa's card, the careless confidence with which she'd offered it, and the thought crossed his mind like a forbidden door creaking open. Not to steal, not to splurge, but to survive. Earlier, during their awkward meeting, Vanessa had insisted he take her card details just in case, tossing them onto a napkin before leaving. She hadn't thought twice about it. Daniel had. Around midnight, after hours of pacing and silent debate, Daniel made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He used the card not for comfort, but for necessity. He paid the overdue electricity bill first, watching the confirmation screen with shaking hands. Then he cleared part of the rent, just enough to stop the eviction process. He ordered groceries for the first time in weeks without calculating every dollar, choosing fruit Oliver liked, and a small pack of chicken instead of instant noodles. Finally, he paid a portion of the medical debt still lingering from his wife's illness, a symbolic act more than a practical one, but it eased a weight he'd carried for years. When he finished, the total was significant, but nowhere near reckless. He sat in the dark afterward, guilt pressing down on him, unsure whether he'd just saved his family or destroyed the last shred of his integrity. 24 hours later, Vanessa's world jolted. She was standing in line at an airport cafe when her phone erupted with notifications. Transaction after transaction flashed across her screen, each one bearing amounts and descriptions that made her smile fade. At first, she assumed fraud. Then recognition hit. The cafe, the tired man, the napkin. Heat rushed to her face, not from anger alone, but from a sudden, uncomfortable awareness of her own arrogance. She had laughed. She had treated generosity like a joke. And now, that joke had weight, consequences, and a human face. Vanessa boarded her flight in a haze, unable to focus on emails or spreadsheets. The transactions replayed in her mind, not as numbers, but as images she imagined unwillingly. Lights turning back on in a dark apartment, a child eating a proper meal, a man sitting in silence, torn between gratitude and shame. By the time the plane landed, her anger had shifted into something heavier, curiosity laced with guilt. She didn't cancel the card. She didn't call the bank. Instead, she did something far more unsettling. She looked up Daniel Carter. What she found unsettled her deeply. Public records showed the job loss, the medical debt, the eviction notice filed, and then mysteriously paused. Social media, sparse and outdated, showed photos of a smiling woman who had passed away 3 years earlier and a little boy growing taller by the year. There was no pattern of recklessness, no sign of exploitation, just a man who had run out of options. Vanessa spent the night staring at her ceiling, confronting an uncomfortable truth. She had always believed herself generous, but generosity without empathy was just performance. The next morning, she drove to Daniel's apartment, unsure what she planned to say or do. When he opened the door, fear flickered across his face before resignation settled in. He looked smaller than she remembered, weighed down by expectation of punishment. Inside, the apartment was modest but clean. Toys were neatly stacked in one corner. Sunlight streamed through a window that had clearly been dark for too long. Oliver peeked from behind Daniel's leg, curiosity bright in his eyes. That single detail shifted something fundamental inside Vanessa. This wasn't a lesson or a transaction. This was a life balanced on fragile hope. Vanessa didn't lecture. She didn't threaten. She listened. Daniel explained everything in a voice stripped of pride, admitting his desperation and his shame, promising repayment even though he had no clear way to achieve it. As he spoke, Vanessa saw the cost of her laughter laid bare. She realized that her joke had been a test she never intended to give, and Daniel had passed it not by restraint, but by responsibility. What followed was not charity, but partnership. Vanessa used her resources properly this time, connecting Daniel with a friend who ran a logistics company looking for reliable supervisors. She paid for a short certification course Daniel had once abandoned due to cost. She set up a structured repayment plan, not because she needed the money, but because Daniel needed dignity. Slowly, painfully, life began to change. Weeks turned into months. Daniel worked long hours again, exhaustion returning, but carrying purpose this time. Oliver started school with a new backpack and stories about his dad's job. Bills were paid on time. The apartment stayed bright. Vanessa watched from a respectful distance, learning more from this transformation than any seminar had ever taught her. She learned that kindness, when given lightly, can wound, but when given intentionally, can rebuild entire worlds. One evening, months later, Vanessa received a notification. A final payment had been made, every cent accounted for. Attached was a short note of thanks, formal but sincere, expressing not just gratitude, but restored self-worth. Vanessa sat quietly for a long time after reading it, realizing that the regret she'd felt had grown into respect, and that a careless laugh had been transformed into a lasting lesson. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you that small moments can carry enormous weight, please take a second now to like this video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the soul. Your engagement truly helps these messages travel further than you know. Please comment below what this story made you feel, because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Years later, Vanessa would still remember the man who taught her the difference between giving and seeing, and Daniel would never forget the day desperation met understanding instead of judgment. And somewhere between regret and redemption, two lives were quietly, permanently changed.